It was a bright Monday morning when Sarah Mitchell drove her black Mercedes into Atlanta International Airport. The polished black exterior of her luxury sedan gleamed under the spring sun as she parked in the VIP lot. Before starting the story, let us know where you are watching from below in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell to join us towards a positive community and increasingly better society. At 47, Dr. Carter had earned a reputation as one of the nation's most skilled and dedicated medical professionals. Today's mission was critical. A wealthy patient in Boston required her expertise for a complex brain surgery. The urgency of the situation led to a private jet being arranged to ensure she could reach her destination promptly. Olivia, always prepared, double-checked her documents, including her medical credentials and flight itinerary, as she stepped out of the car. Dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit and pearl necklace, she exuded confidence and professionalism. Unbeknownst to her, what began as an ordinary morning would soon spark a confrontation that would captivate the nation. Dr. Olivia Carter approached her day with the same meticulous preparation and professionalism that had defined her career. As one of the country's top neurosurgeons, she knew that attention to detail was not just a habit, it was a necessity. On this particular morning, her task was as critical as ever. She was scheduled to fly to Boston for an emergency consultation on a complex brain surgery. Before stepping out of her car at the private terminal of Atlanta International Airport, Olivia took a moment to review everything. Her black leather briefcase containing essential medical files and her laptop was securely by her side. Over her shoulder hung an elegant designer handbag, which held her passport, flight documents, and personal items. She had even printed backup copies of her credentials, including her medical license and identification, ensuring she was prepared for any possible request. Glancing at her reflection in the rearview mirror, Olivia adjusted her pearl necklace and ensured her neat bun was flawless. Her dark skin radiated confidence, and her tailored navy blazer projected authority and competence. Though accustomed to being in high-stakes environments, Olivia understood the importance of presentation not as a means to prove her worth to others, but as an extension of her own high standards. Stepping out of the car, Olivia's heels clicked purposefully against the pavement as she pulled her rolling briefcase toward the terminal entrance. The private aviation section was far quieter than the bustling main airport, with sleek modern architecture and large glass windows showcasing a peaceful atmosphere. A few other passengers, mostly in business attire, mingled near their luxury vehicles, while ground crew members prepared jets for departure. In the distance, a sleek private plane took off, reinforcing that this was another typical day for high-profile travelers. Despite the serene setting, Olivia remained focused. Her patient in Boston was depending on her, and every minute mattered. As she neared the terminal, she mentally reviewed the case details, going over surgical strategies and potential complications. This would be her third emergency call this month, but Olivia was accustomed to managing high-pressure situations with grace. As she reached into her handbag to retrieve her documents, she noticed a security guard stationed at the entrance. Anticipating a routine checkpoint, Olivia held her credentials in hand, medical license, flight confirmation, and ID all neatly organized. Years of experience traveling for emergencies had taught her the value of being over-prepared, and she was confident this would be no exception. Approaching the entrance, Olivia exuded a quiet authority. Every aspect of her demeanor, from her steady stride to the calm assurance in her eyes, reflected her professionalism. But as she stepped closer to the terminal doors, she had no idea that this routine morning would soon spiral into an event that would challenge her poise and spark a much larger conversation about equity and fairness. As Dr. Olivia Carter approached the glass doors of the private terminal, she was met by a security guard stationed at the entrance. His uniform bore the name James Peterson, and his posture shifted as she drew closer. Olivia offered a polite smile, holding out her neatly prepared documents, medical license, ID, and flight confirmation ready for a routine check. However, Peterson stepped forward with a raised hand, signaling her to stop. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said firmly, his tone carrying an edge of authority. "This is a private aviation area. You need to head to the main terminal." Caught off guard by his abruptness, Olivia maintained her professionalism. "Good morning, sir. I have my credentials here. I'm scheduled for the 9 a.m. flight to Boston," she replied, extending her papers for him to review. Peterson didn't even glance at the documents. "I've been working here for 15 years, he said, crossing his arms. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't." His dismissive attitude was unmistakable, setting the stage for an unnecessary confrontation Olivia hadn't anticipated. Dr. Olivia Carter stood at the entrance, maintaining her calm professionalism despite growing frustration. Security guard James Peterson continued to block her path, refusing to acknowledge the valid documents she was holding out. "I've shown you everything you need," Olivia said calmly, her voice steady. "Medical license, ID, flight details, it's all here. Please review them." But Peterson refused, his arms crossed in defiance. "I told you, this is a private terminal," he said with a dismissive smirk. "You need to leave." As Olivia tried again to reason with him, she noticed two white businessmen approaching the entrance from another direction. Dressed in casual business attire and carrying briefcases, they walked past Peterson without stopping. The guard didn't ask to see their documents, instead giving them a friendly nod and stepping aside. Moments later, a white couple approached, holding golf bags. Peterson smiled warmly, opened the door for them, and wished them a good flight. Olivia couldn't help but notice the stark contrast in his demeanor. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice measured but firm, "I've been standing here for several minutes while you've allowed others to pass without checking any credentials. Is there a reason you won't review mine?" Peterson's face flushed red with irritation. "You need to stop making a scene," he snapped. "If you don't leave now, I'll call the police." The pattern of his behavior was unmistakable, and the few travelers nearby began to take notice, whispering among themselves and pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Despite the escalating confrontation, Dr. Olivia Carter remained composed. Years of performing high-pressure surgeries had taught her the importance of staying calm in tense situations. As James Peterson continued to refuse her entry and dismiss her valid documents, Olivia quietly pulled out her phone and began recording. The guard's confrontational tone, coupled with his refusal to address her credentials, was clear evidence of his bias, and Olivia knew documentation would be crucial. Holding the phone steady, she calmly said, "Mr. Peterson, I'm asking one more time for you to review my documents. My flight is scheduled, and I have a patient waiting in Boston for emergency surgery." Peterson scoffed, dismissing her words yet again. Meanwhile, Olivia discreetly sent a text to her charter company's representative, explaining the situation and requesting immediate assistance. She also placed a quick call to the airport security operations center, ensuring they were aware of the issue and monitoring the incident. Around her, a small crowd began to gather. Some passengers whispered in disbelief, while others openly recorded the interaction with their phones. A teenage girl in the crowd started live streaming, narrating the incident as it unfolded. "This doctor is being stopped for no reason," she said, her voice full of outrage. Despite the growing public attention, Olivia maintained her professionalism. "I'm not here to create trouble," she said, firmly but calmly. "I just need to board my flight. These delays are unnecessary." Peterson, now visibly flustered, grabbed his radio and began calling for additional security, his frustration evident. Meanwhile, Olivia stood her ground, confident that the documentation she was collecting and the support she had contacted would ultimately resolve the situation. Even as the tension in the terminal increased, she refused to let the confrontation derail her composure or sense of purpose. As the situation at the private terminal escalated, the small crowd nearby began to grow. Passengers who had initially been walking by stopped to observe the confrontation between Dr. Olivia Carter and security guard James Peterson. Whispered conversations turned into audible discussions, with many questioning why Peterson was refusing to look at Olivia's documents while allowing others to pass unchecked. Several people pulled out their phones to record the interaction, sensing something significant was unfolding. Among the onlookers was a teenage girl, Jenny Martinez, who had been waiting with her family for their flight. She quickly launched a live stream on her social media account, narrating the event as it unfolded. "This is so wrong," Jenny said to her viewers, her voice full of indignation. "This woman is a doctor. She's showing all her documents, but the guard is treating her like she doesn't belong here. And look, he just let that couple through without even asking for ID." Jenny panned her phone's camera to capture Peterson smiling and waving another pair of white passengers through the entrance without a second glance. Within minutes, Jenny's live stream began to attract attention. Comments flooded in, with viewers expressing outrage and disbelief. "Why is he targeting her?" one viewer asked. "This is blatant discrimination," another wrote. The video's view count climbed rapidly, with thousands of people tuning in to watch the scene play out in real time. Jenny, realizing the impact her stream was having, continued to provide updates, pointing out how Dr. Carter remained calm and professional despite the growing tension. Meanwhile, Dr. Carter stood firm, holding her phone in one hand to document the incident, while keeping her other hand on the documents Peterson refused to review. Her calm demeanor in the face of Peterson's escalating hostility was drawing admiration from the crowd. "She's handling this like a pro," someone whispered nearby. "I'd have lost my temper by now." The crowd's murmurs grew louder as Peterson, visibly agitated, barked into his radio, calling for backup. "This is a restricted area," he announced loudly, though his voice wavered. "If you're not authorized to be here, you need to leave immediately." His words only seemed to draw more attention, as curious passengers from neighboring areas began to drift over to see what was happening. Through the large glass windows of the terminal, the pilot of Dr. Carter's chartered jet watched the scene unfold, a concerned expression on his face. He picked up his phone, presumably to contact someone who could intervene. Nearby, members of the ground crew also stopped their preparations to observe, their tools momentarily forgotten. Jenny's live stream continued to gain traction. "This is going viral," she announced excitedly. "There are over 1,000 people watching right now. Keep sharing this. We need to hold him accountable." Viewers were quick to oblige, sharing the stream across platforms. Within moments, hashtags like #LetHerBoard and Stop Discrimination began trending on social media. Several onlookers stepped forward, attempting to intervene. "Sir," a young businessman said to Peterson, "I recognize her. Dr. Carter is a famous neurosurgeon. She's been on the news. You're making a mistake." Peterson, however, waved him off dismissively. "Mind your own business," he snapped, his frustration mounting. "I'm doing my job." An older woman in the crowd, visibly upset, raised her voice. "This is disgraceful. She's shown you everything you need and you're still stopping her. Why?" Her words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement from others. Despite the rising tension, she felt the Carter remained steadfast. "Mr. Peterson," she said once more, her tone calm but firm, "I've done everything required of me. I'm asking you again to review my documentation so I can board my flight. Every minute of delay puts my patient's life at risk." She checked her watch. It was now 8:40 a.m., and her flight was scheduled to depart in just 20 minutes. The crowd support emboldened her, and Jenny's stream ensured that the incident would not go unnoticed. Across the country, viewers were already beginning to share their outrage, tagging news outlets and public figures to draw attention to the injustice. Back at the terminal, the atmosphere grew tenser with each passing moment. While Peterson doubled down on his refusal, The growing crowd and the viral live stream ensured that this was no longer just a local issue, it was becoming a national conversation in real time. As the tension at the terminal peaked, the automatic doors slid open and 3 authoritative figures strode in: Mrs. Thompson, head of airport security, Mr. David Chen, the private charter company's representative, and Mr. Roberts, the terminal's general manager. Their presence immediately silenced the murmurs of the growing crowd. The look of determination on their faces left no doubt they had been monitoring the situation. James Peterson, still facing Dr. Olivia Carter, was initially unaware of their arrival. "Step away from Dr. Carter immediately," Mrs. Thompson ordered, her sharp tone cutting through the air. Peterson spun around, his face draining of color when he saw his supervisor standing behind him. His attempt at stammering an explanation was quickly cut off. Mr. Roberts stepped forward, his voice firm. "Hand over your badge, Peterson. Your behavior has been unacceptable and a violation of our protocols." Peterson's hands trembled as he unpinned his badge, the reality of the situation sinking in. Meanwhile, Mr. Chen approached Dr. Carter, visibly apologetic. "Dr. Carter, we deeply regret this incident. We will ensure you are on your way to Boston immediately." He gestured to a VIP escort who promptly gathered her luggage. Mrs. Thompson reviewed Dr. Carter's documents, announcing loudly for all to hear, "Everything is in perfect order. Dr. Carter has full authorization to be here." Escorted by airport staff, Olivia was led to her waiting plane, finally free from the unnecessary ordeal. As she boarded, the crowd applauded her composure, and the cameras captured the final moments of an incident that would soon spark national attention. Despite the delay, Olivia remained focused. Her patient in Boston was still her priority. After the incident, James Peterson was immediately escorted from the terminal by 2 security officers. His once confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by visible unease as he walked past the crowd of onlookers, many still recording the aftermath on their phones. Inside the airport security office, Peterson faced an internal review led by Mrs. Thompson, head of airport security, and other senior officials. Within hours, Peterson was formally suspended pending a full investigation. Preliminary findings from security footage and testimonials revealed a troubling pattern in his behavior. Over the previous month alone, he had waved through multiple white passengers without checking their credentials, while disproportionately stopping and questioning travelers of color. The evidence was damning, and Mrs. Thompson wasted no time escalating the matter to the airport's executive board. By the next morning, the story had gone viral, fueled by the live-streamed video and the public's outrage over Peterson's actions. The hashtags Airport Bias and PSJDR, Justice for Drew Carter, trended on social media, with millions demanding accountability and systemic change. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines that highlighted the glaring discrimination and the professionalism with which Drew Carter handled the ordeal. Civil rights groups issued statements condemning the incident, and prominent activists called for nationwide reforms in airport security protocols. In response to the mounting pressure, Atlanta International Airport's CEO Richard Wilson called an emergency press conference. Standing before a crowd of reporters and cameras, Wilson began with a public apology. "What happened to Dr. Olivia Carter was unacceptable and does not reflect the values we stand for," he said. "We take this matter very seriously and are taking immediate steps to ensure this never happens again." Wilson outlined a series of sweeping changes to the airport's security protocols. These included mandatory anti-bias training for all security personnel, the implementation of body cameras for guards, and updated guidelines requiring 2 officers of different backgrounds to staff each checkpoint. "We recognize that discrimination, whether intentional or unconscious, has no place in our airport," Wilson stated firmly. "This incident has highlighted the need for deeper systemic reforms." Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson's team began conducting a thorough review of Peterson's employment history. What they uncovered was both shocking and frustrating. Peterson had a long record of complaints filed against him by both passengers and co-workers. Most of these complaints cited unprofessional conduct and discriminatory behavior, but they had been ignored or dismissed by previous management. "We failed to act on these red flags," Mrs. Thompson admitted in a meeting with her team. "That failure allowed this incident to happen. It's on us to make sure it never happens again." As the investigation progressed, several former colleagues of Peterson came forward with their own accounts of his behavior. "He had a pattern," one co-worker revealed anonymously. "He always seemed to target minority passengers, questioning their right to be in the private terminal, while letting others pass without a second glance." Another employee recalled instances where Peterson had dismissed their concerns, claiming he was simply doing his job. At the same time, the airport's management began working with external consultants, including civil rights advocates and diversity experts, to overhaul its training programs. A new curriculum was designed to teach security personnel about implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of equitable treatment for all passengers. "This isn't just about fixing one person's mistakes," Mrs. Thompson emphasized during a team meeting. "This is about changing the culture of our organization." Peterson's actions also prompted broader industry-wide discussions about discrimination in private aviation. Several other airports reached out to Atlanta's executive team, requesting details about the planned reforms and seeking advice on how to implement similar measures. Advocacy groups applauded the swift response, but they also warned that more work was needed to address systemic issues across the aviation sector. Dr. Olivia Carter, though relieved that action was being taken, maintained her focus on her professional duties. After arriving in Boston, she successfully conducted the emergency consultation and followed up on the incident only minimally. Her goal wasn't punishment, but change. When approached by reporters for comment, she stated simply, "I hope this leads to meaningful reforms not just here, but in every airport. No one should have to experience what I did." Despite her modesty, Dr. Carter's calm and professional handling of the situation continued to inspire admiration and support. Letters and messages poured in from people across the country, many sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Others, including young medical students and professionals, expressed their gratitude for her example of dignity under pressure. Peterson, meanwhile, faced widespread public backlash. His name became synonymous with workplace discrimination, and his attempt to justify his actions in an interview only worsened his situation. "I was just following protocols," he claimed, but the overwhelming evidence, including security footage and eyewitness accounts, painted a very different picture. Under immense scrutiny, Peterson eventually issued a formal apology, though many viewed it as too little, too late. The airport's swift and decisive response didn't just repair its reputation, it also set a new standard for accountability in the aviation industry. Within weeks, other major airports announced plans to adopt similar reforms, citing Atlanta's example as a turning point. Civil rights organizations worked closely with airport authorities to ensure that these changes were more than symbolic gestures. 3 months later, the reforms at Atlanta International Airport were already showing results. Complaints about discriminatory behavior had dropped significantly, and passengers expressed greater confidence in the fairness of the airport's security processes. The new training program, now known as the Mitchell Standards, in honor of Dr. Carter's professionalism, became a model for other industries beyond aviation. James Peterson, though no longer employed at the airport, found a different path. After months of reflection and public scrutiny, he joined an anti-bias training organization, using his story as a cautionary tale. "I was wrong," he admitted during a televised panel discussion. "Watching the footage of myself was a wake-up call. I didn't like the person I saw, and I want to make sure no one else makes the same mistakes I did." The changes sparked by this one incident proved to be far-reaching. What began as an unjust confrontation became a catalyst for meaningful reform, both at Atlanta International Airport and across the aviation industry, setting a precedent for equity and accountability nationwide. The incident involving Dr. Olivia Carter quickly became a national flashpoint, sparking widespread conversations about discrimination in aviation and beyond. The viral video of the confrontation, viewed by millions, drew attention to the biases that persist, even in elite spaces like private aviation. Civil rights groups, politicians, and everyday citizens began discussing the systemic issues exposed by the ordeal, using hashtags like Justice for Dr. Carter and Aviation Equality to demand change. Dr. Carter's calm and professional response to the blatant discrimination became a symbol of dignity and resilience. News outlets praised her composed demeanor in the face of adversity, and opinion pieces lauded her ability to stand her ground while maintaining grace under pressure. She handled the situation with more professionalism than most could muster, one editorial stated. Her actions not only exposed the problem, but also demonstrated how dignity can be a powerful tool for change. The story resonated far beyond the aviation industry. Professionals from all walks of life began sharing their own experiences of bias and discrimination, inspired by Dr. Carter's example. For many, her refusal to back down symbolized a broader fight for equality and respect in professional and public spaces. Airports across the country, under growing public pressure, began re-evaluating their security protocols and training programs. Airlines and private aviation companies also joined the conversation, pledging to adopt anti-bias measures and ensure fair treatment for all passengers. Meanwhile, Dr. Carter received an outpouring of support from people across the country. Letters, emails, and social media messages flooded in, thanking her for her strength and calling her a role model. While humbled by the attention, Dr. Carter remained focused on her work, reiterating that her priority was saving lives. However, she expressed hope that the incident would lead to lasting change, ensuring no one else would have to endure the same experience. In the wake of the incident involving Dr. Olivia Carter, Atlanta International Airport moved swiftly to implement a series of systemic changes aimed at addressing discrimination and improving accountability. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, airport leadership announced immediate reforms designed to set a new standard for fairness and professionalism in aviation security. Among the first measures introduced was the mandatory use of body cameras for all security personnel. These devices ensured that every interaction between guards and passengers would be documented, creating a transparent record to deter bias and misconduct. Additionally, new multilingual signage was installed throughout the airport, clearly outlining passengers' rights and the proper procedures for security checks. The goal was to make the process equitable and understandable for all travelers, regardless of their language or background. The airport also revamped its training program for security personnel, incorporating comprehensive anti-bias education. Led by diversity and inclusion experts, the new curriculum focused on recognizing implicit bias, promoting cultural sensitivity, and emphasizing the importance of treating every passenger with respect. The training included real-life scenarios, including a review of the footage from Dr. Carter's confrontation, to drive home the consequences of discriminatory behavior. To ensure accountability, Atlanta introduced a new checkpoint system, requiring 2 security officers from different backgrounds to staff each station. This measure reduced the likelihood of unchecked bias and fostered collaboration between personnel. Complaints against security guards were also prioritized, with a dedicated team established to investigate and address issues swiftly and transparently. The impact of these reforms was immediate and far-reaching. Within weeks, complaints of discriminatory behavior at Atlanta Airport dropped significantly. The changes garnered national attention, prompting other airports across the country to adopt similar measures. Large hubs like LAX and JFK announced plans to implement body cameras, update training programs, and consult with diversity experts to improve their protocols. Atlanta's proactive approach set a new benchmark for the aviation industry. Advocacy groups applauded the airport's leadership, while passengers reported feeling more confident and respected during their travels. Dr. Carter's ordeal, though deeply unjust, had become a catalyst for meaningful change. Her calm professionalism and the public's demand for accountability had not only reshaped security practices at Atlanta Airport, but also inspired a nationwide commitment to fairness and equity in aviation. Dr. Olivia Carter's composed and dignified response to the discrimination she faced at Atlanta International Airport quickly resonated far beyond the aviation sector. Her story became a symbol of resilience, inspiring minorities across various fields, especially in medicine and other high-pressure professions, to stand firm against systemic inequities. As the viral video of the incident circulated, her calm demeanor and professionalism under scrutiny struck a chord with countless individuals who had experienced similar treatment but felt powerless to address it. In the days following the event, Dr. Carter received an overwhelming wave of support. Letters and messages poured in from medical students, young professionals, and seasoned practitioners, many sharing their own stories of being overlooked, questioned, or doubted simply because of their race, gender, or background. For many, Dr. Carter's story was a validation of their struggles and a reminder that their presence in these spaces was not only justified, but essential. One aspiring neurosurgeon, a young black woman in her final year of medical school, wrote to Dr. Carter, saying, "Your strength gave me the courage to apply for a residency program I thought I wouldn't be accepted into. You've shown me that we belong in these spaces and that we can excel despite the obstacles." Similar sentiments echoed in messages from law students, engineers, educators, and other professionals who had faced discrimination and were inspired by Dr. Carter's example. Recognizing the importance of amplifying this momentum, Dr. Carter began mentoring students and young professionals who reached out to her. She offered guidance on navigating difficult situations, reminding them to remain steadfast, professional, and focused on their goals. "Success," she often said, "is the best response to discrimination, but using your success to help others succeed is even more powerful." Dr. Carter also collaborated with her hospital's leadership to create new initiatives aimed at fostering diversity and inclusion within the medical field. The hospital launched scholarship programs for underrepresented minorities in medicine and expanded mentorship opportunities to support young talent. Dr. Carter's story became a key part of these programs, serving as both inspiration and a call to action for participants. Beyond her direct impact in medicine, Dr. Carter's experience sparked broader conversations about the importance of representation in all professional sectors. Universities and professional organizations began incorporating her story into their diversity training programs, using it as a case study to highlight the persistence of bias and the power of professionalism in addressing it. Medical schools in particular emphasize the incident as an example of how to handle challenging situations with grace and resolve. Her influence also extended into advocacy. Civil rights groups reached out to Dr. Carter, inviting her to participate in forums and panels about workplace equity and systemic discrimination. Though she remained focused on her work as a neurosurgeon, she made time to engage in these discussions, understanding the importance of using her platform to push for change. "I never intended to become a symbol," Dr. Carter said during a panel on bias in professional spaces. "But if my experience can help pave the way for others, then I'll do everything I can to make that happen." Her story also resonated deeply within the aviation industry, where minority pilots, flight attendants, and ground crew members shared their own experiences of bias. Dr. Carter's ability to stand her ground with dignity inspired them to advocate for improved workplace policies and practices. Airlines and private aviation companies began reviewing their own protocols, citing Dr. Carter's experience as a catalyst for meaningful reform. The national conversation, ignited by Dr. Carter's ordeal, inspired not only individual professionals but also systemic change. Industries outside of aviation and medicine took notice, integrating lessons from her story into their diversity and inclusion training. Schools, law enforcement agencies, and corporations across the country used her video and subsequent interviews as a teaching tool, emphasizing the importance of equity, accountability, and respect in professional spaces. Dr. Carter remained humble despite the growing recognition. When invited to speak at conferences and events, she consistently redirected the focus to systemic issues, emphasizing the need for collective action over individual recognition. "This is not just my story," she often said. "It's the story of countless others who have faced discrimination and stood firm. I was fortunate to have a platform to make my voice heard, but we must work to ensure that everyone has the tools and support they need to do the same." As time went on, Dr. Carter's influence became a lasting legacy. Medical schools saw an uptick in applications from minority students, many of whom cited her as their inspiration. Her hospital expanded its diversity efforts, and her mentorship program flourished, producing a new generation of professionals dedicated to excellence and equity. In aviation, the Mitchell Standards became a model for fair treatment, and other industries followed suit. Ultimately, Dr. Carter's calm response to an unjust situation transcended the moment, inspiring a movement that empowered individuals and reshaped systems. Her grace under pressure reminded the world that dignity and professionalism are not only powerful tools for change, but also enduring symbols of strength and resilience. Dr. Olivia Carter's story quickly propelled her into the national spotlight. What began as an infuriating moment of discrimination at an airport became a symbol of resilience and professionalism, sparking a wave of discussions across multiple industries. As the viral video of her confrontation with the security guard circulated online, media outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach. Dr. Carter's poised handling of the situation became the focal point of debates about discrimination in aviation, healthcare, and beyond. Major news networks invited Dr. Carter to share her experience, but she declined many requests, choosing to participate only in discussions that focused on systemic change rather than personal publicity. In one interview with a medical journal, she said, "This is bigger than me. It's about ensuring that no one else faces this type of treatment, whether in an airport, a hospital, or any professional environment." Her humility and commitment to change resonated with audiences, further elevating her status as a role model. The incident also opened a broader conversation about implicit bias in professional spaces. Healthcare professionals used Dr. Carter's story to highlight the discrimination that often affects minority doctors and patients alike. Aviation companies held internal meetings to review their policies, many citing her ordeal as a turning point in the industry. Meanwhile, civil rights organizations and advocacy groups praised Dr. Carter's calm yet firm response, using her as an example of how to document and address discrimination effectively. Online, hashtags like #StandWithDRC and DRC_treatment trended for weeks, with millions of people sharing their own experiences of bias and advocating for reform. As public recognition of Dr. Carter grew, her story became a catalyst for change across fields, inspiring individuals and institutions alike to confront discrimination head-on and work toward greater equity in their practices and policies. The aftermath of Dr. Olivia Carter's experience at Atlanta International Airport led to the establishment of the Mitchell Standards, a set of comprehensive guidelines aimed at ensuring fair and equitable treatment in security procedures. These standards, inspired by the reforms implemented at Atlanta, quickly gained traction as a model for airports and industries worldwide. Key components of the Mitchell Standards included mandatory anti-bias training for security personnel, the use of body cameras for accountability, multilingual signage outlining passenger rights, and the requirement for diverse staffing at checkpoints to minimize the risk of implicit bias. These changes not only improved transparency, but also fostered trust between security teams and travelers. The impact of these reforms extended beyond aviation. corporations, law enforcement agencies, healthcare institutions, and schools began adopting similar principles, incorporating Dr. Carter's experience as a case study in their training programs. Videos of the incident and Dr. Carter's composed response were used to teach employees how to recognize and address bias in high-pressure situations. The international community also took notice. Major airports in Europe and Asia consulted with Atlanta's leadership to implement their own versions of the Mitchell Standards, viewing the initiative as a global benchmark for fairness in security operations. Dr. Carter, while humbled by the far-reaching impact, continued to focus on her work as a neurosurgeon. If this experience can drive change and prevent others from facing similar injustices, then it's worth it, she said in a rare public statement. The Mitchell Standards became more than just protocols. They symbolized a commitment to dignity, respect, and accountability on a global scale. After losing his job at Atlanta International Airport, James Peterson faced widespread public backlash for his discriminatory behavior toward Dr. Olivia Carter. The viral video of the incident and the subsequent revelations about his pattern of targeting minority passengers left him isolated and discredited. For weeks, Peterson remained silent, but the weight of public scrutiny and the undeniable evidence forced him to reflect deeply on his actions. Determined to turn his failure into something meaningful, Peterson eventually reached out to an anti-bias training organization. The group, dedicated to educating individuals and institutions about implicit bias and discrimination, welcomed him on board, seeing his story as a powerful cautionary tale. With their guidance, Peterson began using his experience to teach others about the consequences of an intract bias and the importance of self-awareness. In workshops and training sessions, Peterson openly discussed his actions, acknowledging the harm he caused. "I was wrong," he admitted in one session. "I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt people because of it. Watching the footage of myself was a wake-up call. It forced me to see how my actions were rooted in assumptions I didn't even realize I was making." Peterson's willingness to confront his mistakes resonated with participants, many of whom found his story both humbling and instructive. He shared how his biases had not only hurt others, but had also damaged his own career and reputation. By owning his actions and committing to change, Peterson hoped to inspire others to recognize and address their own prejudices before they caused harm. Over time, Peterson became an advocate for greater accountability in security procedures, pushing for systemic reforms that emphasized fairness and equity. His personal transformation, though imperfect, became a testament to the possibility of growth through self-reflection and education. "What happened to Dr. Carter should never have happened," Peterson often said. "But if my story can help prevent future incidents, then I'll keep telling it." Though Peterson's redemption could never undo the damage of his actions, it added a layer of complexity to the larger conversation about discrimination and reform. His journey served as a reminder that change begins with acknowledging one's flaws and committing to do better for oneself and for others. The incident at Atlanta International Airport left a profound and lasting legacy, reshaping not only airport security protocols, but also sparking a global conversation about equity and respect. The reforms inspired by Dr. Olivia Carter's experience, now known as the Mitchell Standards, became a benchmark for fairness in security procedures worldwide. Airports, corporations, schools, and law enforcement agencies adopted these standards, using them to address systemic biases and promote accountability. For minorities in various fields, Dr. Carter's story became a symbol of empowerment. Her calm, dignified response under pressure inspired countless individuals to stand firm against discrimination and advocate for their rights. Applications from underrepresented groups in medicine, aviation, and other industries surged as people found encouragement in her example. Mentorship programs, scholarships, and diversity initiatives launched in her honor helped create opportunities for future professionals who might otherwise have been overlooked. Despite the widespread recognition and impact, Dr. Carter remained focused on her primary mission: saving lives. She continued to excel as a neurosurgeon, dedicating her time to her patients and mentoring young medical students. For her, the incident was a catalyst for change, but her purpose never wavered. The best way to respond to discrimination, she often said, is to excel and help others succeed. Her experience became more than just a moment of adversity. It became a movement for dignity, equality, and systemic reform, leaving a lasting imprint on the world.